Hello, everybody. I'm Jason Forrest. I guess I'm supposed to have a camera in here, but you can't see me. Wait. You can see me. Hi. All right, that's it. I'm turning the camera back off. I'm going to jump into this really quickly. Isotype and graphic language. So who am I? That's a good question. I am a New York City-based data viz designer and writer. I just finished up a 9-year tenure at McKinsey and Company, where I led a lot of their big public projects, including the Data Visualization Lab. And then I left and created my own agency with the very creative name called the Jason Forrest Agency. I'm also the editor-in-chief of Nightingale, the journal of the Data Visualization Society, and you can see lots of my articles there. Get in touch. Always like to have new friends. Delighted to be here. And one could call me a data viz obsessive. This is just a mere fraction of the pamphlets that I own about pictorial statistics, which I'll talk about in just a second. I have a rather large online archive, and before I start, I just want to say if anybody wants access to it, it's available in a kind of a password protected Google account. Please get in touch. I'm more than happy to add you for your own research. I think several folks, even in Symposium, have actually back contributed. So would love to share my obsession with you in your research. And it's this obsession that's really helped me in my work. This is the cow chart. We made this for COP26 back in 2021, and I had no idea that dropping a cow in the middle of a 3D bar chart would break the internet. But it ended up getting an official complaint from the South American cattle industry. So while this isn't an isotype, I think it holds to some of the same ideas in that, pairing images with data creates a really interesting and powerful way of retaining information. And it's this kind of quest to try to understand exactly what happened to Isotype is one of the things that's really driven me. This is a very quick kind of timeline. Ultimately, Isotype existed before Otto. We'll talk about that in just a second. Otto Neurath, Marie Neurath, Gerhard Arndt created Isotype. They handed it off to Rudolf Modley. Modley and Marie really helped to turn that into visual explanation and education. Obviously, this kind of moved through education icons into journalism, largely in kind of analog times known as the graphics desk. That turned into infographics. Eventually, these all kind of got moved into the computer world, data viz. The iPhone had a big deal impact on kind of visual communication understanding, and of course, data journalism. Guess what? I don't have enough time to get into all of that, but I will jump into what I can get to, which is starting again with really reflecting on how pictorial statistics started way before Otto Neurath. He covered this in his book about hieroglyphics. And really, I think the point is that there's almost a whole world of advertising influence, of graphic design influence, that really also is kind of fighting for attention and inspiring kind of subsequent generations of designers. But what really set Otto Neurath apart was his method of quantifying graphic elements into a system for visual education. This became a pragmatic way for his team to quickly create isotype charts for a wide variety of qualitative and quantitative data by focusing really just on the graphic elements. And while Neurath was attempting to create a universal picture language, he really had to make even adjustments himself. This is the project for the Tuberculosis Society in the United States, Association in the United States, and they wanted a more palatable way of showing death because us Americans are so squeamish. And so he used an urn as opposed to his typical icon of the cross. And what's important here is the adaptation of the system. So going to jump into this diagram that I created. Obviously, prehistory talked about Otto right there. We can almost see a vertical kind of axis, economics on the top, education on the bottom. Otto obviously had a huge impact on Rudolf Modley and Marie Neurath. Marie really focused on visual education. That moved into pictorial diagrams. Eventually, we would think of these things as infographics. If we kind of slide to the right, those eventually turned into reports, textbooks, visual journalism, and to what we have today, data journalism and data viz, icons, systems, computer systems, and of course, visual education. So moving back to Marie, obviously she was connected with the kind of core team, and her role as a transformer, kind of role between creative director and data scientist, she was really left to be the sole practitioner, or the primary practitioner, maybe I say, after Otto's death in 1945. And so this piece from 2 years later shows how she really continued to explore the system as it related to kind of solving and explaining certain types of problems. What you see here are two charts comparing the US and British methods of government. And she really does this by a very studied way of applying pattern, color, and really a sense of motion, this flow from top to bottom, from right to left, making equivalencies across things that might not actually be that equivalent, but kind of help to prove a point. As we know, she moved into children's science books, I think largely because it was a very sustainable living, but also because it really continued her interest in trying to educate a willing audience, and certainly children were a great audience for her to speak to. So pivoting over to Rudolf Maudsley, he started off as Otto Neurath's intern while he was in high school, kind of hung around when he was in college, moved to Chicago, really to be kind of a, this is not a very generous term, but a patsy for Neurath, to go work at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. And I guess the point there is that it was very hard to work internationally, collaborate internationally at the time, and frankly, Rudolf Maudsley had his own ideas. And so Maudsley started creating pictorial statistics in the vein of Isotype. He had to leave the museum about a year and a half later. He tried to get work as a lawyer and then realized that he had a very unique skill that was starting to be in demand, pictorial statistics. He created this, designed by Philip Reagan, or I should say in collaboration with Philip Reagan, for the Tennessee Valley Authority, really this major report on the Mississippi Valley. For the Public Works Administration. This really opened the door for a tremendous amount of government work. Like Neurath, Maudsley had really wanted to stay very true to the clarity of visual information. In these two charts, he kind of extended ideas from Isotype by using certain a grid as these units. But unlike Maudsley, on the right, a little bit more like Isotype, we're just kind of changing out the icons on the left. The icons start to have more play. They start to interact in a way, and you see really the unit of measure being kind of carried through. Notice the waste tree versus the others being kind of a categorically different icon. As he continued, he really started to explore what he called pictorial diagrams. These diagrams took lots of different formats. Sometimes they were like almost like a diagram of what's happening in a place to kind of show you how the categories of information related. Sometimes they were showing you, actions of an organization. Sometimes they were showing you exactly how a flow kind of moved from one place to another. On the right side, we see, as he started to develop these pictorial diagrams, sometimes they were really designed to tell a story, right? And as young people do, Maudsley used a photomechanical way of reproducing his icons, unlike the kind of static ways that the Isotype team used. And so he started finding ways of reusing his graphics to tell stories in kind of a more animated way. And as he started to do so, the pictorial diagrams started to really take qualitative data and communicate them in a way that was almost comic-like. They were really fun, and they really attracted people to Maudsley and his educational mission. These are two examples where the little people inside are not just used as representations of a category of information, but they've evolved into actually becoming these symbolic people living inside the scenario. The left is for really the first anniversary for the Museum of Modern Art, and the right is probably one of the most cartoonish Maudsley pieces from a booklet called Who's the Boss? And before I continue, I just love the slide. I want to acknowledge the value of misinterpretation. I think it's really important. We see throughout history where the idea travels faster than the actual authoritative source. And I think the concept of Isotype got to the US really before a lot of actual charts. And that leads us to Omar Pankos Goslin. And he is definitely a practitioner, has been largely forgotten in history. He created some very striking isotype influenced pictorial statistics that were just very unique in their own right. You feel like they are created in reference to the isotype team, but somehow there are too many unique ideas to keep them from being just lookalikes. Goslin began publishing statistics really shortly after Neurath first appeared in Survey Graphic in 1931. And as you can see here, this is his first book, Rich Man, Poor Man. It has a very different visual style, almost kind of an Art Deco-like approach to the icons. And I almost think about Goslin's work as being from like a parallel universe, because there's a lot of unique ideas that appear in his designs that just seem to extend from ideas of his own. Rich Man, Poor Man was a socialist book for learning economics for adults, and I think this design is particularly fascinating. It's a visual pun of a money bag that doubles as a skull, and it could have been maybe even lifted from some kind of a joke or something, but using this in the pictorial statistics really heightens its impact. It creates more emotional investment for the viewer. The hand-drawn skulls slightly differ, which kind of makes them different from the kind of more mechanical graphics of Modley and Neurath. And even showing these mirrored images kind of creates it more like a joke, or even to a degree a nightmare, kind of equating money and death. Goslin was actually a Baptist preacher who became interested in socialism as a way of public betterment. And after Rich Man, Poor Man, that he did with his wife, Rillis, he then started to really get involved with the Foreign Policy Association, helping to establish a series of small hardback booklets called Headline Books. And Goslin contributed for about the first 10 or so of these books, really through the 30s. Eventually, they took more of a pamphlet design, as you can see in the middle, and Rudolph Modley's pictorial statistics team took over, as well as Graphic Associates, that we'll talk about in a second. In the 60s, these pamphlets just became illustrated. But what's fascinating is the headline series continued into the 1990s. So the efficacy of these pamphlets is really, really startling. This is a chart from his first book, Made in the USA. A lot of Goslin's designs feel awkward, right? They're visually striking. They're exploring ideas of isotype and data visualization that we're kind of familiar with, but they just do it in their own way. They may not even feel entirely successful. This is basically an illustrated bar chart, almost kind of like with the Isostat kind of film strip technique kind of overlaid on top of it. But as you can see, the icon designs really also greatly differ from Gerhard Arndt's influence, with way too much detail and way too much pattern. But it just makes it exciting and kind of lively in a way that other teams didn't really practice. This is also a few years later, 1935, Peace and Party Platforms and the Struggle for World Order. Again, very unique ways of creating these striking visuals. What you see is really like the first page of the book. It's not only kind of like an introduction to the idea of the two parties in America being platforms for peace, but also brings in this kind of pictorial statistics at the bottom. Yes, those are elephants for Republicans, people with their backs turned and their heads hanging low for people that didn't vote, and of course donkeys for Democrats. On the right, we've seen a Neurath and team do things with little people on kind of blocks to show population density, but never really with these inverted pyramids in the same way. They're a little too shaded. There's a little too much detail with the people. And it creates also this implied bevel that you see in the back, and it's just kind of visual styling that makes it just a bit more appealing, if not maybe a little bit more noisy. And his works were pretty distracting. Goslin, this is one of the last pieces he did in the headline series about cooperatives. And you can see here that he would just do things like kind of put them on a tilt. He would bring in things like Art Deco, kind of, what are they called, pictures to help explain what the categories are. The little farmers over here on the right are in different poses, whether they are on their own land or on tenements, or tenants, I should say. But the thing that's so fascinating about Goslin is that you can see that they were really trying to do things. Of course, also on the bags of flour have the labels, right? We don't need that much detail, but you get it anyways. About the same time, Fortune magazine launched in 1929. So throughout the 30s, it was wildly successful. In the 30s, in the late 30s, Irving Geis came on. He was very clearly influenced by Isotype. He must have been immersed in what was happening in pictorial statistics, because when he was given the task of illustrating the annual Fortune survey, he created something that was kind of in between a data visualization, an Isotype, and a cartoon. He had this comic style where you could see the man at the bottom of the right-hand chart. This was a person that didn't know, right? They didn't know. His shoulders are shrugging. This Uncle Sam character comes back. Of course, this is in the 40s, so we see lots of Nazi imagery, lots of fascist imagery with this kind of glove reaching across. He also worked on some colorful works. This was actually a painted graphic that he had, which not only shows really lots of information, as I think we've seen with the isotypes, showing kind of global populations, exactly how they're mixed up. While we still see a tendency towards kind of illustrating more of a cliche based on race, we still are counting all people, really on all surfaces of the earth. So this happened, I think this one's actually 43, which makes it very, very comparable with Telefact. So Rudolf Modley did so much, and is only now, I think, starting to really get some appreciation. After his work in pictorial statistics, and again, I think very much as a hustling immigrant to America, found ways of reusing and reselling his charts. Eventually, that turned into Telefact as a way of putting these kind of pictorial statistics and also democratizing it in newspapers. There are thousands and thousands of Telefacts. They were published daily. They were syndicated throughout many newspapers in the U.S. I found probably 30 or 40 different types of newspapers. I've written about it extensively. But what's fascinating is that they became part of the story of the newspaper, and they would have full-page ads explaining, well, what is a Telefact? How does it exist? There's the page before. This is literally the front page of the Wisconsin State Journal announcing that Telefact's coming, like it's such an extra attribute to the news. And it's a fascinating story, which really also has not really been fully told, because as Modley was creating these Telefacts, he would literally find new ways of repackaging them. He did, I found about 10 or 15 that were repackaged for the New York Times. He would also put them into circulars to kind of gather statistics together to really tell a story and help to kind of augment other kind of editorial, special editorial content. There's some really beautiful work with these kind of really snappy, almost advertising-like graphics. In addition to all this, of course, he also tried to help other people get access to icons for use and teach them how to create pictorial statistics. This also extended into the Public Affairs Committee pamphlets. These were a wildly successful series of pamphlets sold for 10 cents. They'd sold over 30 million pamphlets by 1961. You could buy a whole giant selections of them for your school or church. And what's fascinating is he's again constantly pushing and advancing this idea of what you can do by framing the statistics. There's kind of a very natural transition that happens in the mid-1940s where Maudley's work trails off for a variety of reasons, and a new team comes in called Graphic Associates. Graphic Associates I think that they were actually worked with Maudley and kind of like went their own way, and you see more of this visual style, more of this kind of influence of comics. There's really not a lot of information about them. The name Graphic Associates, I think, actually does a big detriment to finding more about their work. One of them was named Henry Grant Adams. Again, very difficult to find information about him. If anybody has any information out there, please tell me. I'm dying to know. But they pushed the boundaries of Isotype into new directions by really taking ample inspiration, not only for comic books, but also satirical cartoons. Another practitioner for Graphic Associates was Bunji Tagawa. He was a Japanese-born illustrator who moved to the U.S. in 1922, got connected with Graphic Associates, I think, around 1938, and by his own estimation, created about 3,000 hand-drawn maps. What's fascinating is Tagawa stayed really as a scientific illustrator working for Scientific American all the way until the 1980s. And here's just one last example where you see this idea of like looking at a psychological survey, translating it into a very kind of obvious visual format. And my last slide is really not one that's going to inspire confidence, but it's important to realize that the efforts of Maudley, the efforts of these kind of pictorial statistics really did start to penetrate across government reports. I've got examples of church newsletters and bulletins that use pictorial statistics. These are definitely icons sourced from Maudley that we saw earlier in the talk. And while they may not necessarily be as dynamic visually, they're not great works of graphic design, but they really tell a story and they really surface insights. So that's it for me. I think I only had 20 minutes, and I think I'm at 22 minutes. So thank you so much. If you want to write for Nightingale, get in touch with us. We pay all of our writers. That's my email. Thanks you so much. Thanks, Sue. Thanks, Vibo. We'll see you guys next year, and I don't know. Have a great conference. Bye.